A lot of people like to take these kinds of opportunities to say that such passages in our Bibles weren't really said or done by God, but that these sort of things are just mistakes in the Bible, inserted or corrupted by fallible man. Also, thinking on these kinds of things, it will certainly lead us to ask more uncomfortable questions, certainly, such as, why did God actually tell the Israelites to slaughter innocent men, women, and children in their conquest of Canaan? Now, there's been, as of modern times, well, more so in modern times than in the recent past, a cry out against God and bringing him into question about his own ethics and morals over such issues. This movement, which is championed by the atheist in this world, is usually done with slight regard and disrespect toward the Lord. In fact, a lot of them are having a heyday with this kind of subject, and it helps fuel their successes by bringing people of similar opinions into their folds, or even gathering new folks who are won over by their arguments. But can there be any credit to their claims at all? The funniest thing about all of this is how they're bringing God's ethics and morals into question, because we must then ask how much they themselves have, considering they're literally rejecting the goodness of the Bible, single-handedly has brought the Bible, which itself has brought the world's attention to ethics and morals. Let's think of it on this wise. God's the one who has, since the beginning of time, set the standards of what is right and what is wrong. He set the standards also between both good and evil, letting us know through his written word the differences between the two. So when you've got carnal man, especially those who make up their own rules of what's right and what's wrong, since they obviously have to ignore the Bible's ethic rules, questioning God about his morals, those accusations turn out to be just a bunch of baloney. When Job couldn't see his own pride issues, and who wasn't even trying to question God's authority in the first place, the Lord certainly stepped in with these powerful words. Job chapter 38 through 42. This is a summary, but please read all of it in your spare time. Let's go to 4 through 6. Where was you when I laid the foundations of the earth? This is God asking Job. Declare if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures thereof, if you know? Or who has stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? Have you commanded the morning since your days, and caused the day spring to know his place? Verses 16 through 19. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if you know it all. Where is the way where light dwells? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? Knowest thou it because thou wast then born? Verse 21. Or because the number of your days is great? 25 through 29. Who's divided the water course for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth? Hath the rain a father? Who has begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of heaven? Who has gendered it? 33. Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Can you set dominion thereof in the earth? 36. Who's put wisdom in the inward parts? Who has given understanding to the heart? 39, verse 1. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? 13. Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks? Did you do that? Or wings and feathers unto the ostrich? 26 through 27. Does the hawk fly by the wisdom and stretch her wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make her nest on high? chapter 40, verse 2. Shall he that contends with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproves God, let him answer it. 8 through 14. Will you also disannul my judgment? Will you condemn me, that you may be righteous? How hast thou an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like him? Deck yourself now with majesty and excellency, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of your wrath, and behold every one that is proud, and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto you that your own right hand can save you. Basically, when we're able to answer such questions as these, which no man can answer, then we can counsel God. Now, as far as the Canaanites are concerned, a people of whom God commanded his people to exterminate, they were far from being innocent people, and their contamination, which stunk greatly, was affecting anything good in the earth. Look at Deuteronomy 9:5, Deuteronomy 12, verses 29 through 31, Leviticus 18, 24 through 25, and Leviticus 20, 23. Their deaths were nothing more than a cleansing of a disease, and God had every right to do it. But did God know what he was doing when it came to killing the kids? Well, without trying to get into a long psychiatric discussion about how even kids get affected by a devilish society, and who can carry it on over into their own adulthood, because, no doubt, and unlike us, God sees people for what they'll become, not as what they are when they're just babies. Let's just take the example of another instance in the Bible where God commanded everybody to be slaughtered, much in the same way as the Canaanites, but this time it was the Amalekites. Let's go to 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have. Spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkeys. So what happened? Basically, King Saul was disobedient. 1 Samuel 15:8. Saul took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the rest of the people with the edge of the sword. Now, Saul's disobedience led to the loss of his own kingdom. It was then handed on over to David. And in Queen Esther's time, centuries later, Saul's disobedience almost led to the annihilation of every Jew in Persia. How's that? Well, one of the descendants, one of the children of King Agag, a certain Haman, and I've got a subnote for Haman coming up in a minute, whom we learn about in the story of Esther, almost led a successful campaign of the slaughter of all the Jews in that kingdom, perhaps even beyond. Had not there been intercessory from Queen Esther, the thing that God told Saul to do to the Amalekites would have turned right around and been done to the Jews. God, unlike us, can see the future of things. And we have to get into a place in our lives that we trust him, even when we don't understand him. There's a certain point to where people will have to go beyond before God will destroy them. And when they cross that line, God then takes action. We see these things in the flood of Noah and in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But at the end of the day, once God has done according to his will, we would be foolish to question the justice and execution of God Almighty. Can we not see that hundreds upon hundreds of people die every day of some sort of disease, accident, old age, etc.? Is that unjust for God to allow? Can we not see that because he created everything, that he actually owns everything and is free to dispose of things at will? But more importantly, can we not also see his patience in all the things that he certainly allows to flourish? Which things, if we stop and think about it, aren't all particularly good. His long-suffering, it's great. His mercy is great. His understanding is infinite. And there's always a reason that he does what he does. And those reasons are always good reasons. We of a finite mind are trying desperately to understand an infinite God. We must therefore approach him with awe and respect, else we should never expect to gain access to the meaning of life, which incidentally, that is, the meaning of life, is nothing more than to live every day for God, undeterred by fleshly matters. God will be happy to answer the tough questions which are asked of him with respect, whether they are asked by an atheist or not. It doesn't matter, just as long as he's approached with the proper respect, just as long as the student is willing to await his answer with great patience, even if it takes years to learn that truth. In fact, atheists who end up turning their lives on over to God may prove out at the end of their course that they were an elect all alone. Can anything be impossible for God? Well, we should know that despite our misunderstandings, that we have a good, generous, and very kind, loving God. Any evil act stemming from his personal being is totally beneath him. Totally beneath him. It's impossible. For not only is he incapable of lying, see Hebrews 6:18, he's also incapable of sinning, see James 1:13 and Hebrews 4:15. Yet we must agree with what the scriptures say concerning him. And again, instead of announcing that the word of God is wrong in some places and that man's hands had corrupted it so that it says things that are just too far out of God's capabilities to do, we have to instead begin to understand God in all of his complicated forms. We must ask guidance from the Spirit of truth to help us understand why about these sorts of things. But we also must be very careful not to throw a negative light onto God's decisions. We must, again, learn how to trust him. For instance, let's, in your spare times, look at Psalm 5:11, Psalm 9:10, 17:7, 18:2, 18:30, 31:6, 37:3, etc. And that trust, friends, must eventually become blind. But folks, that's not a bad thing. Blind faith is not bad in God. That comes after years of God working with us and covering us with his love. And then we shall begin to understand the afflictions, the trials, the tribulations. We'll begin to understand them, of why God sends us through them. They're never for nonsensical reasons. In the meantime, and again, we must be very careful not to view his decisions and justice in a negative light. We're simply too ignorant of the bigger picture to ever be his judge. Let's just take a lesson from the preacher, shall we? Ecclesiastes 5:1-2. Keep your foot when you go to the house of God. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with your mouth. Let not your heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and you are upon earth. Therefore let your words be few. All right, let's go to our subnote as promised for Haman. I wanted to talk about him a little bit more when I boldly declared that he was a descendant of King Agag the Amalekite. Now, I'm well aware of the fact that not everybody agrees to Haman's origins. That even though the book of Esther calls him an Agite, am I saying that right? Agagite, whatever. Esther 3:1, just look it up. Many scholars are not satisfied that this insinuates him as to being a descendant of King Agag the Amalekite. Some even going as far as to say that perhaps Agagite was just the name of a town in Persia. And that latter statement is perhaps because the scriptures say that Agag was killed by the prophet Samuel when Saul failed to do so. Let's look at 1 Samuel 15:32-33. Then said Samuel, Bring you hither to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came unto him delicately. And Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past? And Samuel said, As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. However, and despite this, the Jewish Targum assuredly calls Haman his descendant, as well as one of the most influential biblical scholars of all time, Flavius Josephus in his Jewish Antiquities, book 11, chapter 6, verse 5. Even John Wesley breezes over this as if it's simply common knowledge, saying concerning Haman's lineage, Agagite, an Amalekite of the royal seed of that nation, whose kings were successively called Agag. So therefore we must then ask ourselves, why would men, as studious as Josephus and John Wesley were, make such a horrible mistake? Well, perhaps those guys didn't make a mistake. After all, by the Bible saying that King Agag was spared by Saul, it's not an impossibility that that had included the king's personal household. In fact, it wouldn't even make any sense to say that the king's entire household was wiped out while only leaving that one man alive. That household could very well have included his 2 sons. Even the book of Samuel admits that what the Israelite soldiers considered goodly, they spared. 1 Samuel 15:9. But Saul and the people spared King Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they did destroy utterly. And even though when it says, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, right after speaking of the best livestock, it's not a foregone conclusion that this passage did not also include other goodly things of value, such as gold, weaponry, clothing, and other enticing spoils, which also could very well mean some people too. John Gill's exposition of the entire Bible says, not only the best of the fattest of the flocks and herds, but also of their household goods. Be that as it may, I think that the underlying message is quite clear in the fact that Haman being called an Agagite was no mere coincidence. Think about it. A man known as an Agagite who just because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him declares genocide on all the Jews right after learning of Mordecai's heritage? The only thing that can make sense about Haman's ghastly decision, at least to me, is that upon hearing that Mordecai was a Jew, he, being a mortal enemy to the Jews because of his heritage, took this opportunity to try to wipe them all out once and for all. What else could have made a man hate an entire race so badly that because of simple disobedience from one person, he would make such a horrid decision? Please read Esther 3, verses 1 through 6. Not only so, but this further backs up the claims of God that when he says to destroy all the seed of a nation, he really means what he's saying, all of it. And I don't see what had happened in the book of Esther to be punishment to the Jews because of Saul's disobedience, since if it were, there wouldn't have been a happy ending to the story. But I see this as a cause and effect of man's disobedience to God. And God, being as merciful as he is, despite the disobedience, still rescued his people out of certain death. Anyway, now this is going back to this book here. All that was from my book, Blaming God. I think you would enjoy the whole book. But now going back to this book and concluding my thoughts. The definite article, the Satan, being the form of a bad disease and being applied by God on occasion, can still be the Satan, a negative application. For though God doesn't apply sinful evil onto us, he can apply the Satan in the form of illnesses, but only if it serves a greater purpose in the end. Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good, even when God uses evil against us in our training and learning. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose.